Number 1. It's the highest you can go. Out of the more than 30 million accounts registered in Osu, only 35 players have officially reached the summit. That's 0.016% of the entire player base over Osu's nearly 16-year lifespan. Today I'm going to be talking about these 35 players and how they reached the top. However, I must add that some of the information presented here may be incorrect, especially during the ranked score and PPv1 eras of the game. Finding information from 15 years ago can be especially challenging since the game wasn't as popular and information wasn't really documented well. So if there's a mistake you spotted, make sure to point it out and I'll make a corrections comment just like I did in the PP record video. So without further ado, let's get into it. 15 years ago, the first public beta build of the coolest EBA/Wendan simulator and editor was officially released by Peppy. With it, the first ever players of the game started popping up. Some of Peppy's friends, some people who were wandering around the internet, and EBA or Wendan fans alike started signing up for this cool new game called Osu. When the first public beta version of Osu was released on September 24th, there were no online rankings. There wasn't even a D rank yet. Mods like Easy and No Fail were just added, and there weren't even any replays around this time. However, Peppy was working extremely hard, releasing an update every day, and by October 1st, replays were added, and a sort of unfinished version of the online ranking system. On October 5th, Peppy made the first ever ranked map in Osu called Disco Prince, and a day later on October 6th, ranked score was officially implemented, and with it, the first ever person to take the number 1 spot. An Australian player named Ayup was the first person to take the number 1 spot. Although, while Peppy may have had it for a short period of time, Ayup was the first person to get the number 1 spot officially, as we have evidence to back up this claim. His reign would only last for 3 days, as US player Ivalset would take number 1 from Ayup. And with this, the first rivalry of the Osu online rankings were born, as Ivalset and Ayup would battle for the number 1 spot, although it was pretty much just a friendly competition. Ayup and Ivalset would continue to take ranked number 1 away from each other until an Australian player named Echo45 would take the number 1 spot, and he was even the first person ever to reach 200 million ranked score. Of course, a day later, Ivalset would take back number 1, and once again he started battling Ayup for the number 1 spot. This would continue until one of the best players at the time, Saturos, would take the number 1 spot on December 23rd. He would have a large gap against number 2, and he even became the first person to get 1 billion ranked score. He would continue to stay at the number 1 spot for a long time. Actually no, he was so good that he transcended the number 1 spot on July 31st. After 8 months of being the number 1 player though, a Japanese player named Tubebuta would work hard to beat Saturos. And it paid off, as he became number 1 on September 6, 2008, finally outranking Saturos, who was number 1 for most of 2008. Although Saturos would take it back again a day later, and then Tubebuta would take it back from him on the 15th of September 2008. Saturos takes it back after 4 days, then a player named Cyclone appeared out of nowhere and took number 1 from Saturos on September 25th, and he stayed at the top for a while. Some guy named rolled in and took the number 1 spot from Cyclone on November 23rd, and became the first person to reach 3 billion ranked score. This is the only time Rolled would take number 1 though, as after 27 days at the top, Cyclone would take it back. It's 2009 now, and people were looking out for Tubebuta and F-Zero to take the number 1 spot, as they held the number 3 and 2 spots respectively. However, by February, a Polish player named Kubracek would come out of nowhere and reach the number 3 spot, and a month later he would take the number 1 spot from Cyclone. This only lasted about 1 day as Cyclone would retake it, followed by Tubebuta reclaiming the number 1 spot for the first time since September 2008. And he reached 4.5 billion ranked score. Then Cyclone memed and reached number 1 by 1 point. And then, on April 11th, Kubracek would take it back, but for only a short while, as Cyclone once again retook it on the 17th. Kubracek would prevail, though, as he took it back on April 30th. And he would stay as number 1 for a while, until this player from Paraguay named Hiko would take it from him on June 12th. Then Cyclone reclaimed the throne once again on the 20th. This would only last until July 5th, as a familiar face would take the throne for the first time ever. White Wolf, known today as Wolf, would take number 1 for the first time in his career on July 5th, 2009, putting a lot of dedication into reaching the number 1 spot, as he had played all the maps that were ranked at the time, and he was pretty good. Though another familiar face would take number 1, as Doomsday 93 would take it from Wolf 2 days after he had gotten it. And just like Wolf, Doomsday played every map and worked tirelessly to reach the number 1 spot. And of course, just like Wolf, this would only last for a few days as F-Zero became number 1. This was the only time that he took number 1, unfortunately only having a small gap before being outranked by Doomsday on July 14th, which was followed by Wolf taking over after 2 days. Wolf would stay at number 1 for a little over a month until Hvick would take it back on August 28th. Hvick would then go on to battle 4 players to keep his number 1 spot. The first was Tubebuta, who took it back on September 8th. Hvick would beat him on the 14th. Then Hotka, also known as Lavals, would take number 1 on October 12th, becoming the first Korean player to take number 1. Then Hvick would take it back on the 19th. Then a rivalry formed between Hvick and Chinese player Anna Coppola for number 1, with their battle starting on the 29th of October 2009, with Hvick emerging victorious on February 2nd, 2010. Followed by a short time where Doomsday would take number 1 for a day in March, only to be outranked by Hvick, who would remain at number 1 from March to June 2010, with Anna Coppola taking number 1 back on June 24th. Of course, Hvick would beat Anna after 2 days, but Hvick wouldn't last for long as WhiteCat, also known as Sure, would secure the number 1 spot. Then Harder, also known as Zero D, would take the number 1 spot. Harder would last until October 3rd, 2010, when Doomsday took number 1 and stayed as number 1 until early 2011. Kubracek returned on January 20th, but only lasted a day before Doomsday came and took it back. Then a battle started between Wolf and Doomsday for number 1 that started on March 16th and culminated on the 18th. It may seem short, but they took number 1 from each other 3 times respectively in a span of 2 days. Doomsday came up victorious, but he was soon outranked by Uwan, who would stay up until Flute would outrank him on April 23rd. Now, I forgot to mention one other player who, while he hadn't taken number 1 yet, was considered the best player of his time. Regarded as one of the most unbelievable players the Osu community had ever seen at that point, with his stamina being unmatched, his reading being spectacular, and just being the best all-around player. Voted best player of 2010, Cookiezi would take the number 1 spot on the Osu global rankings for the first time on May 1st, 2011. He would play maps that were extremely difficult and add mods pushing the boundaries of what was possible. He would stay as number 1 for a month until Uwan would take it back from him for 3 days. Cookiezi would of course take it back. He would stay as number 1 until November 5, when White Wolf would take it away from him. Wolf would stay as number 1 until April 2012, when US player GeckoGates would take number 1 and a mini battle between Wolf and Gecko would ensue, which resulted in a draw as 5231 Kinoko from China would take number 1 on May 16th. GeckoGates would take it back though, and eventually Wolf took it back from GeckoGates on June 5th. During Wolf and GeckoGates' battle, PPv1 was introduced, and on January 24th it officially replaced the ranked score as the main ranking system. To summarize, PPv1 was a skill-based system, as opposed to the grinding system that Score had. Nevertheless, White Wolf stayed as number 1 during the switch, lasting until November 28th, when Cookiezi would take it back, but that only lasted about a few hours as White Wolf retook it. But Cookiezi would take it back on the 30th, and that lasted until January 2013, when German player Shadowsoul would take it. Cookiezi would beat him though, and then proceeded to stay as number 1 from January 21st, 2013 to October 4th, 2013, when the Lua would beat Cookiezi. Hi, so it turns out that the Lua didn't really beat Cookiezi per se. Cookiezi was just kicked off the leaderboards because Peppy had rolled out a change in performance points, and since Cookiezi had an injury and had been inactive for over a month, he was booted off, leading to the number 2 player at the time, the Lua, to take the number 1 spot. So yeah, that's all thanks. And unfortunately, he would only stay at the top for a day, as Shadowsoul would take it back. This was followed by Hakure Reimu taking number 1 on October 20th. At this point in time, many changes were occurring. Cookiezi was banned on November 11th, which sent out a shockwave as other top players started banning themselves as well. And Peppy was about to change the PP system forever. By the start of 2014, White Wolf, now known as Wolf, would be the last person to take number 1 during PPv1, starting his reign on November 24th. By early 2014, people were given a sneak peek of what PPv2 may look like, and they didn't like it, which led to Tom94, the creator of the Osu TP system, to join the Osu team. After a quick maintenance which ended Wolf's reign and simultaneously made the number 1 spot vacant on January 20th, concluded on January 27th, PPv2 was officially implemented, and the first player to become number 1 under the system was Ruruchi. Ruruchi was one of the best around this time, and it was impressive that his reign lasted for so long, as he didn't even care about PP. He would reach 8,000 PP in March, with number 2, who was Wolf, being at 7,700 PP. At around May 2014, two players who were extremely skilled at double time were able to close the gap, with sayonara-bye taking number 1 on June 20th, and Snow White, who is better known as Hvick225, passed Ruruchi in PP by July. Sayonara-bye set scores like Shotgun Senorita DT and Colorful Days DT. Hvick225 would pass him on August 17, 2014. And unfortunately, Sayonara-bye had to go on mandatory military service around early 2015 as per South Korea's conscription laws, which isn't the only time this would happen, unfortunately. During Hvick's reign as number 1, he would be the first person to reach 9,000 PP, and for a while it seemed like he was going to stay at the top for a long time, until Wolf had a rampage, putting him at number 1 on February 6th. With Wolf at 9,300 PP and Hvick at 9,100 PP, it seemed like Hvick had a bit of catching up to do, and he delivered, with multiple scores like a 538 PP score on A and Friends, which was the PP record, and another PP record on 7-7 worth 560 PP, and Hvick would take number 1 on March 25th. At this time, Hvick would build a huge gap between him and the number 2 player, with him reaching 10,000 PP, while Index, who was number 2, was at 9,300 PP, which made him stay as number 1 for a long time. Of course, there was this newcomer who was gaining traction. Rafis would sweep the rankings by reaching 10,000 PP by September and closing the gap between him and Hvick. Rafis would take number 1 for the first time on November 22nd, which started a rivalry between the two best DT players in the world. Hvick and Rafis would continue to battle for the number 1 spot between late November and December, but ultimately it would be Hvick to claim victory, as on the 31st of December 2015, he would become the number 1 player once again, after both of them traded for it during December. This was also around the time Cookiezi was unbanned, with him setting insane scores like Blue Zenith with Hard Rock, Freedom Dive with Hard Rock, and an Everything Will Freeze at Sea. Cookiezi would reach the number 3 spot by January, which just added more competition, but Hvick would remain at number 1 until May 12, 2016, when Rafis had officially passed him. Hvick did not contest this though, as he had fallen inactive around this time. Cookiezi was also pretty much close to Hvick and Rafis in terms of PP, so he was able to take number 1 on June 25th for the first time since 2013. Rafis would take it back within 2 days though, and he would stay as number 1 until September 20th, when Cookiezi and Rafis started their rivalry, trading the number 1 spot from September to October. In the middle of their little spat, Angel Megumin would join in the battle, taking number 1 for the first time on October 8th, and he became the last person to ever achieve the number 1 spot with Mouse. And for a while it seemed like Hvick came back too, getting his new top play on Sakura no Uta and other 600 PP plays. However, he would fall inactive again. Cookiezi would end up being the victor, as he would take number 1 on October 23rd, 2016. How long did he stay as number 1 though? 20 days? 75 days? 100 days? Try 455 days. He stayed as number 1 for the entirety of 2017. So why did he stay on for so long? Well, he's Cookiezi. But the actual reason why he was dominant for 2017 was because players simply just fell short a lot of times, because Cookiezi would just enlarge the gap that he had without even trying. In January 2017, for example, Cookiezi had a 127 PP lead against Angel Sim, but in February that lead had widened to 376 PP. By September, Cookiezi had a 425 PP lead against the number 2 player at the time, Vaxei. And in October, Cookiezi would become the first person to reach 14,000 PP, while the other competitors stayed in the 13,000 PP range, with only the top 5 being able to reach 13k, and number 10 was at 11,000 PP. But there was one person who was able to go above and beyond when it came to fighting against Cookiezi. Rafis had begun to slowly inch his way to the top, and by December he had reached 14,000 PP. Cookiezi's lead had begun to break down, as by January Rafis was less than 100 PP away from Cookiezi. On January 21st, 2018, Rafis would set an 829 PP play on Necrophantasia, securing not only the PP record but the number 1 spot. This ended Cookiezi's historic reign at the top, and since you needed a huge amount of PP to outrank him, Rafis' lead was secured for now. However, a new influx of farm maps were ranked, as PP mappers like Sotarks had started popping up. This led to many players gaining a bunch of rank. One of them was Mathy. Mathy had 13,100 PP in January, but by March he was at 13,700 PP. And on April 15th, Mathy would outrank Rafis and take the number 1 spot to the dismay of many. There were arguments that he didn't deserve to be number 1 and that he was a DT1 trick. While that may seem crazy today, 2018 was a different landscape. Rafis would take back number 1 on April 22nd, but Mathy would fight back on April 25. He would have probably stayed around for a while, but there was this hidden rebalance that put Cookiezi back at number 1. This was hilarious as he did absolutely nothing to retake the number 1 spot. This would be the last time Cookiezi would be at the top. Mathy would of course retake number 1 from Cookiezi on May 28th. Mathy would stay at the top until AngelSim, now known as Firebat92, would reclaim his throne, reaching 14,000 PP on August 10th. At around this time, Hard Rock became the meta, with Honesty being the PP record, which was held by Idke, which meant that players like him would be in contention for the number 1 spot. But DT still reigned supreme, as Mathy would take it back from Firebat in early September. By November though, Idke had reached 14,200 PP, and on November 24th, Idke had set the PP record on Cry Thunder, and with it becoming the number 1 player. He was the first number 1 player from the United States since Gecko Gates in 2012. Mathy and Idke would then start fighting it out for number 1, taking it away from each other in late 2018, with Mathy taking it away from Idke one last time on December 17th, 2018. On January 12, 2019 though, he would get outranked by Idke, and that would be the last time Mathy had number 1. But Idke would still have competition though, as a Korean player named Flying Tuna would take the number 1 spot in February. They started taking it away from each other in the following months, with Klug, also known as Freddie Benson, joining in the competition. Flying Tuna would hold number 1 for the last time on May 27th, and Freddie Benson and Idke would trade the number 1 spot with each other. This would have probably continued if it wasn't for Vaxei's return. After setting a bunch of 800s and 900s, and setting the first 1000 PP play, Vaxei would take number 1 for the first time in his career on July 9th. But Idke would take it back though on July 11th. But after setting 1066 on Wizard's Tower and setting a whole bunch of crazy scores, he would take number 1 back from Idke. Vaxei had an enormous lead by the end of September, being ahead by 744 PP. And it probably meant that he would have been number 1 for a long time, right? Right?
What the fuck is going on in chat?
Dude, you just got fucking unbanned!
What?
You
No.
You
Was?
Bitte.
Yes! No way! Oh my god. Holy shit! Said 1k. Yes! We got it, boys!
WhiteCat was unbanned. 2 weeks after he was unbanned, he would become number 1 globally on October 6, 2019, and stay as number 1 for 550 days. His reign from October 2019 to April 2021 saw many barriers broken, like the 1.1k and 20,000 PP barriers, and he would set multiple 1k PP plays. WhiteCat was just extremely dominant for the entirety of 2020, not only in double time, but he was well versed around a lot of skill sets like aim and reading. It really did seem like WhiteCat would stay as number 1 for a stupid amount of time. October 2020 rolled around and he had reached an entire year of being number 1, and he was still ahead by 1300 PP. This would be around the time where he started to slow down and his competitors started to rise up. December 2019. A player named Mrekk would enter the top 50 for the first time. At this time, he had just 13,600 PP, while WhiteCat had 18,200. He was very much a player that was overlooked as a DT1 trick, as his top plays included hits such as Snow Elation, Padoru Padoru, and Guess Who Is Back. He got his first 1k on Make a Move with 3 mod on June 14, 2020, when he was ranked 14 globally. However, a month later, he had reached the top 5 and was closing in on the inactive Vaxei. Of course, he had outranked Vaxei by the time August came around, and he had reached 18,000 PP. And in November, he reached 19,000. January 2021 came, and a rework was pushed that nerfed aim, and as a result, both he and WhiteCat were nerfed, as WhiteCat was back to 19,500 PP. And Mrekk was at 18,600 PP. In March, Mrekk was at 18,900, which probably meant another 2 to 3 months with WhiteCat as number 1. By early April though, Mrekk was at 19,334 PP, 200 away from WhiteCat, and on April 8, 2021, Mrekk would make history. WhiteCat's historic reign had ended, and with it a new reign would begin. Mrekk would continue breaking the game's limits, setting scores that shattered the community, ranging from his Magma SS, his FC on the 2 Uniteds, the first FC on Moikai was double time, a 1600 PP choke on Save Me, the PP record on Marianne, Keys to the Music 1200 and 1300, Boshi the Rock 1200, Wild Shrine, the first DTFC on Cycle Hit, and many, many more. He would set his 100th 1000 PP play and get the 10-star FC medal on February 24, 2023, truly showing how unfathomable his lead and dominance over everyone had become. As of April 29, 2023, he is still number 1 and has a 2,917 PP gap against number 2, who is currently Lifeline. Mrekk has been number 1 for over 750 days, which is 2 years of being number 1. He has the longest individual reign and is closing in on Cookiezi for the most time spent as the number 1 player. If he is still number 1 by December, Mrekk would officially be the greatest player of all time. But right now, he has secured a place in Osu history as one of the best. But he is just one of the many people who were in the throne before him, and before long, a new challenger would rise up and will definitely shake up the Osu community. And that's all, folks. From A-Up to Mrekk. It has been fun researching over 15 years worth of content and forums and seeing how the Osu community has grown. 10 out of 10 would definitely do again. No, please don't. Oh my god, this took so long. Also, thank you guys for 600 subscribers. This is an insane amount for me, and I really do thank you for all the support that I've gotten in the PP record video. And so with that, thank you guys for watching. Comment, like, and subscribe for more documentaries just like this, and for old OSU replays rendered in HD. See ya!